Prima. As the first of the 13 created, Prima was a cast of the mold of Primus himself, a warrior of great nobility who placed the greater good above everything else. He tends to take way too much weight upon his shoulders. He tends to clash with Megatronus. Prima's role as the 13 is known as the Warrior of Light. In the course of battle with Unicron, Prima lost his grip upon his Star Saber when the Chaos Bringer assaulted the group with treacherous vision. Although the 13 were able to shut down Unicron, down soon thereafter, they did not manage to do so before he seized Prima to put him in his mouth, biting down and splattering and crushing Prima's body. Prima survived the experience. The 13 turned to the business building the beginnings of civilization and the rebirth of the new Cybertron. Prima worked primarily with Vector Prime and Alpha Trion, but their clique was treated with some degree of resentment by their siblings. They were thought that they were trying to control the actions of the others. Prima continued to grow even more detached as they continued their works, spending his time theorizing about the nature of the 13. He considered himself the group to be the forces lawful of good and right, but looked upon the last that they had created, Megatronus and Liege Maximo, as the chaotic and potential evil of the 13. When Maximo discovered the writings that Prima had made about this, he then told Megatronus. A physical altercation between Prima and his dark opposite resulted in a permanent wedge driven between the brothers. Prima discovered that Megatronus and Liege Maximo were working on a secret project of their own, creating a race of robotic creatures. He demanded it to be shut down, suspecting them to have sinister plans and motives. He forced the 13 in a vote on the matter and emerged victorious. This would be the catalyst for the final falling out between the Primes. Furious upon the votes that were cast on him, Megatronus subsequently argued retreating to the wilderness of Cybertron. But Prima and the others tracked him down and brought him back to face justice, only for it to become apparent that Maximo had set up Megatronus. Things quickly developed into a chaotic free-for-all when the first fight between the siblings had broken out. Megatronus was exiled for his crimes, but despite the differences, Prima provided him with a ship and a blade and wished him farewell. Prima took custody of the Requiem Bastard and cast it into the depths of space. As the rest of the 13 spread out in the universe, Prima was among those who decided to remain on Cybertron to guide the new race of beings that emerged from the Well of Sparks. Prima dubbed the more primitive and bestial of the creatures that emerged, known as the Predacons. He defended the more advanced biblical robots that came from the Well against the powerful Predaking. Prima brought Predaking to a standstill and declared the Well off limits for Predaking's feasting. His shown of strength crowded the Predaking, only to submit to Prima's will, the only submission that Predaking has ever taken in his long history. After the Great Catalyst, Prima vanished from the history and was no longer seen walking around with the people of Cybertron. The surviving Cybertronians soon forgot about the 13, remembering them only as heroes of the ancient. Vector Prime. Stern, serious, Vector Prime considers himself a force of order and balance in the universe. His powers over time and space allowed him to create and prevent turmoil to suit his needs. At times, his personal artifact of power was the Blades of Time, which he could use to travel through other dimensions and time zones. The second of the 13 to be created, Vector Prime was just like Prima, a warrior. Vector Prime created a time loop around the inner form of the Chaos Bringer, ensuring he would never to be awakened. However, Vector Prime was tainted by a touch of Unicron's darkness. In the aftermath, Vector Prime joined with Prima and Alpha Trion to create the rules and the order for the new community and the upcoming birth of the new Cybertronian species. Suspecting a sinister motive, Prima forced the rest of the 13 to vote on the matter, and Vector Prime, again, letting the project continue. Hoping to put the ugly past behind him, the Primes then turned their attention to the new Cybertron and their plans to build the future cities and the new Cybertronian race. Vector Prime's faith in his siblings, however, had long since been shattered as he quietly retreated to another dimension when no one was looking. Alpha Trion. Alpha Trion was the third Prime created by Primus, defeating Unicron. The group of the newborn Primes soon began experimenting with their powers, strategizing for the coming conflict with their creator arch-nemesis, Unicron. Alpha Trion preferred to strategize than directly fight. In the period following Unicron's defeat, the Primes began rebuilding Cybertron, each focusing on their own interests. Trion would collaborate with Prima and Vector Prime, creating an order for the new civilization. Trion was surprised by Megatronus and Solus Prime's feeling with one another blossom into a mutual love, which would involve putting special endangered robotic beasts against one another underneath the depths of Cybertron. Liege Maximo's manipulation would lead to the accidental murders of Solus Prime. Even as Maximo himself blamed Megatronus for the manipulation, a battle broke out between all 13 primes, and they all wounded up, falling into the caverns below Cybertron, temporarily knocking out Alpha Prima unconscious. When Trion came around, he noticed that Liege Maximo had blown apart with the Requiem Blaster, and Onyx Prime had been grievously wounded by Quintus Beast. After the construction of Solus Prime's tomb, Alpha Trion and the remaining primes hatched a new plan to revitalize the new Cybertron. Alpha Trion and his closest friend, Alchemist Prime, retired from the leadership roles, but would guide the progress of the new Cybertron race. Alpha Trion went along with Primus' plan to keep the existence of the T-columns in secret. The ability to transform a secret of time and being was supposed to be buried within the past. After the Great Catalyst and founding of Icon, Trion would take up residence there and founded the Hall of Records. When the first Quintessons arrived on the planet and gave the Cybertronians the gift of transformation by reactivating the dormant T-cogs, Alpha Trion noted that even he had more mentally have been deceived by the Quintessons' false promises. After Cybertron's golden age, Trion sought a council with Vector Sigma, hoping to gain the access to the Matrix of Leadership and use it to revitalize Cybertron's increasingly chaotic society. Vector Sigma refused to give him access to the artifact by reassuring him that the time would soon be right for the Matrix of Leadership to be crowned. Instead, the computer gave him a badge of Vector Prime to be given to Sentinel as a gift. The badge will react to Trion's copy of the Covenant and his quill, creating a new reawakening of the 13 Primes. While he waited in the Hall of Records, he kept himself busy by monitoring transmissions from across the planets. Encouraged by Alpha Trion, Orion Pax and Megatronus became friends and partners. Trion hoped that his friendship would lead to the fulfillment of the prophecy. Alpha Trion was assigned as a security guard to keep the various artifacts of the Primes out of the Decepticon hands. He launched many of these artifacts to Earth, as he sensed that one day the war would spill over the organic planet. After the majority of the Transformers left Cybertron, Trion remained on the planet with a handful of other Autobots, including the Wreckers and the Dinobots. Eventually transcribed many of his adventures in the Covenant of Primus himself. At some point after, Cybertron Alpha Trions transmitted an alternate copy of the Covenant to Earth so that the humans could learn more about their galactic neighbors, the Transformers. Solus Prime. Solus Prime was the fourth Prime created by Primus to defeat Unicron, the builder and the creator of the 13. Solus opted to remain a free agent as the newborn Prime strategized for their upcoming battles against the Chaos Bringer. Solus created a hollow suit which contained a virtual copy of Unicron's anti-dark spark for the Primes to train against. The Primes quickly learned that their enemy was more than capable of torturing them to the core of their spark using direct combat. Solus befriended Megatronus, building for him the first set of Dark Energon skin. She constructed the Requiem Blaster, a weapon that is considered virtually unstoppable. The Requiem Blaster led the heated debate amongst the 13, with Liege Maximo pointing out that Megatronus could easily turn on his brothers with the new hollow suit and the Requiem Blaster and become nearly unstoppable. Solus Prime defended Megatronus, arguing that Megatronus successfully resisted the temptation of his inner demons and was perhaps best suited to carry this dark and ancient artifact, working closely with them in order to mimic and imitate their own powers. Solus would train with Alpha Trion to build a computer capable of predicting all of Unicron's potential moves in battle. Eventually, the time came to assault Unicron himself, wielding her forge and her sword. Solus led the charge through Vector Prime's space bridge onto Unicron himself. In the era that followed, Solus continued to work at her forge, building useful items and artifacts, and becoming the settlement of the Primes. She and Megatronus remained close with each other. Tension between the Primes began to grow on the day that Solus refused to make a suit and armor for Liege Maximo, who claimed that he was building some type of robotic creatures for company. As a gift though, Liege Maximo would give her one of these creatures, whom she adopted as a pet. Solus would then decide to forge the armor, but was still in question of Liege's purpose. Solus voted against the project, but without a definitive remark aimed at Prima, who cast Megatronus' character. Megatronus confirmed that Solus over Maximo's suit and armor, which had been completed long ago but never had been delivered. Their disagreement eventually grew. A fight would break out as Megatronus would kill Solus' pet, which secretly would be recorded by Alpha Trion's devices. In the chaos, Megatronus fired the Requiem Blaster without thinking, fatally wounding Solus Prime. Before Solus passed away, she would confess her undying love to her love, Megatronus. Solus Prime's body returned to the core of Cybertron, and the passage that was left behind became known as the Well of Sparks. The surviving Primes built a tomb in her memory, far away from Cybertron. 1/13 of Cybertron's population consider themselves the actual descendants of Solus Prime the Maker. Micronus Prime. Micronus Prime was the 5th Prime created to battle Unicron. As the Primes began planning for their future campaign against the Chaosbringer, Micronus gravitated towards the growing factions of strategy. Their earliest fights against a simulated copy of Unicron went poorly, although Micronus and Megatronus were adamant that Unicron considered himself too independent to create a similar set of Dark Primes. As the Primes began building weapons for the upcoming conflict, Micronus worked alongside Solus at her forge, using his own abilities. Along them was the Chimeria Stone, which would become Micronus' iconic artifact. Micronus befriended Onyx Prime, and the two became nearly inseparable. As the 13 trained and planned, Micronus worked alongside Solus Prime and the other strategists to create a massive computer capable of running through all of Unicron's possible responses to an attack. The time eventually came to take the fight to Unicron. Intending to cripple and distract Unicron while the warriors damaged him, Micronus participated in a great battle against Unicron, drawing off the energon-seeking missile that Unicron fired at the Primes by venting with his own energies. The Primes managed to fight their way inside of Unicron with the help of Vector Prime's portals. Unicron's dark energon counterattack provoked a flood of nightmarish visions. The 13 ultimately triumphed over Unicron, and together they returned to Cybertron. What they didn't know was what close contact that Unicron had amplified on them in the inner core of darkness that the Dark Lord possessed in their spark. The Primes began building a settlement for themselves, dividing into a like-minded group. Some focused on labor, while others debated laws. However, Micronus never really fit in with one group to another. He thought the Primes were viewed as unmanageable under some of the strict laws imposed by Prima. Tensions continued to rise between the 13, which finally boiled over. Prime learned about a farm of robotic beasts that Liege, Maximo, and Quintus Prime had constructed. The Primes had voted to design a future farm. Micronus, however, would vote against this project. Micronus voted to let this project continue for the art of science. Micronus decided to accompany Onyx on his final journey into the Wells of Sparks together. Their sacrifice would activate the well and allow it to start producing the new life in the first Cybertronians. Alchemist Prime. Alchemist Prime was the 6th Prime created by Primus to defeat his arch-foe Unicron. Alchemist was one of the Primes who believed that destroying Unicron would have negative repercussions for Primus. As one of the 13 free agents, Alchemist found himself working closely with Solus Prime and Nexus Prime. As their battle against the Chaosbringer drew closer, Alchemist developed a strategy to intimidate Unicron, called a cerebral shutdown, forcing the giant into hibernation. He drew up a complicated battle plan for the others of the members of the 13 to follow. They would distract Unicron long enough for Optimus Prime to breach Unicron's spark chamber and trigger the actual shutdown of the Dark Lord. When the Primes took the fight to Unicron, Alchemist fulfilled his duty with the A-Palm. The 13 turned their attention to building a settlement and laying down the foundations of Cybertron society. Alchemist drifted freely from one group to the other, never really committing to one particular concept or idea of the Primes. The Primes retired from active life but continued to guide their early Cybertronian civilizations. Alchemist was one of the Primes who helped mitigate the damaged road of the planet's surface, blasting apart smaller rocks and asteroids before they could come impact to the surface. Alchemist opted to remain on Cybertron for a time. Indeed, rumors swore that Alchemist may still walk around Cybertron after the old millennia, disguised as a humble bartender. Onyx Prime. Onyx Prime was the 8th member of the 13 produced by Primus. Onyx had more balance. He was a fierce warrior and fought bravely in the battle with Unicron, but also had a spiritual side as well. He was very close to Solus. The death of Solus hit Onyx harder than any member of the Primes. It was Onyx who discovered her body in the workshop, and the beast-like crowd that let loose chilled Alpha Trion to the very oil and the very spark. He had to be physically restrained by Vector Prime after finding Solus. As his dying act, Onyx volunteered to catalyze the process journey down to the Wells of Sparks with the power of the Trypticon mass. The Predacons of the new age of evolution certainly drew stronger from Onyx's pattern, as did the beast formers that followed him in the near past. Quintus Prime. Quintus was the 10th Prime created by Primus to fight against Unicron. His artifacts was the Emberstone, and he became one of the strategists of the 13. After Unicron's defeat, Quintus drifted freely between the cliques and formed a group alongside Alchemist Prime and Optimus Prime. Quintus had worked alongside Maximo Megatronus to create a new robot beast. A conflict would break out between the 13, or whether or not Maximo had the rights to create new life. A conflict that would become so bad it would demand a vote from the 13. Quintus was among the members of the 13 that demanded that Megatronus be found and made and pay for his crimes. But the group was surprised when Solus' dead body began to glow, started opening, and headed deep within the core of Primus himself, creating the Wells of Spark. When Maximo was confronted by the farm, Quintus refused to accept any personal responsibilities for the beast's creation. The 13 then proceeded to fight their battles and spilling the caverns within the beast. With the age of the Primes over, Quintus went into space to seed life, hoping to create new races that might one day bring peaceful alliances to Cybertron. His first stop was a metal-rich planet that he named Quintessa. He created the first Quintessons, a manipulative, deceitful, and evil race that would become less than friendly with Primus' new creations. Alpha Trion had wondered what had become of Quintus, and a speculation that Quintus' own creations may have disposed him and killed him. Nexus Prime is known as the Warrior of Forms. Nexus was all about change and mobility. As the first and greatest combiner of all time in the Cybertronian history, he was able to merge together any robots into new combined forms at all will or separate himself into multiple independent components. When standing alone, his body seemed to shift to be overlaid in ever-changing forms and combinations that he may take. Proud and frequently unpredictable, even to those who knew him best, Nexus Prime was also full of good humor and can even be a bit of a prankster at times. Liege Maximo. Liege Maximo was one of the 13 Primes created by Primus to fight against Unicron, and was a master manipulator whose artifacts were the Legion of Darts. Maximo was one of the strategists of the 13. Maximus focused on the mining, storage, and refining of energon. Maximo acted differently in the factions of the 13. Maximo was ultimately the one who led the group by factoring. Prima had plotted that the Primes were most like Unicron instead of Primus, experimenting with creating new robotic beasts when he requested a powerful armor suit to deal with them. Prima ordered Maximo to shut it down, saying his farm was unsafe. Prima ordered Maximo to shut down his farm, and it was further revealed by Alpha Trion and Maximo had been pitting the beast against one another, killing them and fighting to the death. Whether Maximo had the right to do the experience with the beast was source of conflict between the 13, later resolved by the vote of deciding that he did not have the right to do so. Maximo convinced Megatronus to try and retrieve the armor from Solus, an action that led to Solus Prime's decease and the creation of the Well of Sparks. Maximo was revealed to have placed a monitoring device on a pet that he had given to Solus. When the creature tried to attack Megatronus, he reacted by blasting it, leading to Solus to attack him. Upon the confronted of the farm, Maximo tried to accuse Megatronus of being the true mastermind behind the beast. When Megatronus realized that Maximo had been manipulating and using the 13 the whole time, a conflict broke out that led the Primes being set upon 3 massive war beasts. Once the conflict rose, Maximo was found torn into pieces and his head destroyed by the Requiem Blaster. Though no one was sure who had actually fired the fatal shot, Maximo was buried in a tomb where his arm would eventually be taken by Megatron to be allowed to use the forge of Solus Prime. Megatronus. Megatronus was the 12th Prime created by Primus to defeat Unicron, rightfully proud of his power and unwaveringly loyal to his creator Primus. He thought of himself as a warrior first and foremost, but his dark powers and confident nature meant that he rarely was at peace with himself. His artifact power was the deadly Requiem Blaster, used stellar fusions as an energy conduct. Increasingly, he already had destructive powers, viewing himself as an outsider. He frequently butted heads with the Warrior of Light, Prima. To this point, whether his closest allies among the 13 viewed him as unpredictable and unstable at times. He struck up a close friendship with Solus Prime, which eventually blossomed into a mutual romance. Hidden in fear, it continued to fester. As soon as he gave away something darker, his insecurities would actually affect his actual spark. The 13 newly created Primes soon began experimenting with their powers. Megatronus considered himself a warrior that was trained alongside Vector Prime. Megatronus had the closest connection to Unicron, offered to advise Solus Prime on how to create the best weapons to defeat the Chaos Bringer. Among their collaborative efforts with Dark Energon's skin, which would protect the Primes from the toxic Dark Energon, Megatronus eventually requested that the blaster be made for him by Solus Prime. She agreed, and the Requiem Blaster was forged. Solus had doubts about the weapon, but her deep faith in Megatronus will allow her to trust him with this ancient blaster. When the fight against Unicron came, Megatronus fought alongside his siblings and was ultimately triumphant. However, some of Unicron's darkness had rubbed on all of them. The fact that Megatronus strangely appeared to reveal it. In the era of peace and rebuilding followed, Megatronus worked alongside Liege, Maximo, and Micronus Prime, refining Energon for future use. He slowly befriended more of the 13, although his love for Solus never faded. Unfortunately, this period of peace was not last. Megatronus and Solus were both being manipulated by Liege and Maximo, who drive a schism between the two lovers, which was secretly recorded by Solus Prime's actions. In the chaos, Megatronus fired the Requiem Blaster without thinking, fatally wounding Solus Prime. Before Solus passed away, however, she confessed her undying love for him. Megatronus would hide himself in untamed regions of Cybertron until the surviving Primes discovered him. Megatronus confessed his crime, but also accused Maximo of setting up the whole plot. The accusation flew quickly, and before long the argument descended into a free-for-all. In the aftermath, Liege Maximo was apparently blown apart by a shot from the Requiem Blaster. Along with the other 13, Megatronus attended Solus Prime's funeral. He donned that Solus Prime's suit and armor would never be in exile in space, and never to be seen again. Ions later, a young gladiator known as D16 took inspiration from the ancient folk tales, renaming himself into Megatronus. The prophesized 13th, Optimus Prime. Optimus Prime was created as the last of the 13th, the first generation of Transformers. Each created directly by Primus as a band of unique warriors to combat and defeat Unicron. Upon his creation, Optimus united the 13th by greeting, "Till all are one." While all the other members of the 13 each possessed unique abilities and artifacts, Optimus wielded no special powers or weapons. It was only through his vision and encouraging words that allowed the 13th to finally defeat Unicron. In the era that followed, Optimus served as a mediator and the voice of reason among the increasingly argumentative group of the Primes. After the death of Solus Prime, the Primes descended into a full conflict against one another. Optimus emerged mostly unharmed from the final conflicts that split the 13th. However, upon the activation of the Well of Sparks, Optimus chose to enter the Well and be reborn as a lesser Cybertronian, in order to know them and their needs better. Before doing so, he asked Alpha Trion to remove the references to his name from the Covenant of Primus. Carrying the damaged body of Orion Pax, and accompanied by Micronus Prime, Optimus bid farewell to his brothers and announced the new era of the Primes had ended. The three of them entered the activated well, which began producing new mechanical life. Among the many humanoid Cybertronians that emerged from the well was Orion Pax, a humble bot with no memories of his previous life. Alpha Trion recognized that once had become the fellow Prime, and made a note to keep an eye on him for later, when darkness would approach. Orion eventually moved to the city of Icon, where he found work of an activist, newly established Hall of Records, under Alpha Trion's watchful eye. During the Age of Wrath, Orion Pax became Alpha Trion's aide. Orion eventually became friends with Jazz, a member of the underground resistance movement that had formed against the Quintessons. When the Cybertronians finally rebelled against the Quintessons, Orion spoke to Alpha Trion that there may be more than one variety of Quintessons. Alpha Trion told him that he needed to keep his knowledge and secrets to aid the war effort. Ultra Magnus served as his personal bodyguard. The duo would face many hardships along the way. Orion eventually fulfilled his mission. When the Quintessons were finally routed from the system, Orion was present to witness an activation of the very first space bridge, which heralded the arrival of the Cybertronian Golden Age. After the Golden Age, Zeta Prime's caste system became increasingly oppressive. Orion developed a friendship with a gladiator named Megatron. The two sought to revitalize Cybertron's castle system. They remained friends until a fateful meeting of the High Council, in which Orion was named the next Prime that believed in Optimus's new two-all-are-one system. Over the course of the war, Optimus eventually discovered the Matrix of Leadership after Megatron poisoned Cybertron with Dark Energon. The Matrix cast all doubts of Optimus' mind with his worthless leadership as a Prime, and once on the surface he asked Alpha Trion to help build a starship, the Ark, so that the Autobots could evacuate the planet while it recovered. They were pursued by Megatron's aboard on his ship, and the two factions traveled through the last working space bridge, scattering them across the galaxy. Optimus' crew visited several lost Cybertronian colonies and ran afoul of the Quintessons once again. They also encountered the tribe of nomadic Cybertronian mutants named Muticons. Their leader, Mercury, temporarily aided the Autobots in the battle against both the Decepticons and the Starseekers. Eventually, the Ark reached out the organic planet known as Earth, where Optimus Prime and a small group of Autobots took residence. The Autobots secretly allied themselves with the United States government and set up a permanent base in Nevada.